In 1938, the first large survey of human sexuality found that, according to established medical criteria, 75% of American males were technically sex deviants.
This is Exploring Unusual Sex, the podcast about odd stuff that helps understanding everyday matters. Our host today, from Milan, Italy, is author, journalist and personal coach Ayzad.
Welcome. In this episode we talk about the price of virginity, altocalciphilia, the right to sexuality, neurological porn, and much more. Let's get starting, and the first topic is Bdsm. When can a form of sexuality be told as truly unusual? Let's take Bdsm, meaning domination and submission erotic games. It is generally considered a deviance, yet it is way more common than you think. In fact, a series of studies showed that in the industrialized countries it appears among the fantasies of 1 person in 6, and it is practiced, on some level, by 1 in 10. Running these figures with census data, this means that English-speaking countries count over 30 million people having fun this way, and whenever something is so widespread, considering it unusual seems a tad forced. After all, the fascination of Bdsm for lots of people is evident. Just think of the global success of the 50 Shades of Grey saga, or how erotic domination imagery has always been used by the advertising and media industry to capture their audience's attention. This is largely due to biological reasons. Human beings are social mammals, and if you ever watched a National Geographic episode or have a dog, you know that animals of this type relate through more or less explicit domination and submission dynamics in every context. In the sexual one, where there are fewer inhibitions, such instincts manifest themselves even more clearly. Of course, you can approach Bdsm also out of sheer curiosity, emulation, or wish to experiment new sensations. In many cases, however, eroticizing power imbalance in the bedroom becomes especially fascinating in moments of personal crisis. You don't have to think of huge traumas. Feeling a bit under the weather, unsatisfied, or at the mercy of events, maybe even just unconsciously, is enough. In these situations we tend to seek some proof of still having control, choosing one of 2 opposite strategies. Dominant persons show their power controlling their partner, whereas submissive ones make the proactive and deliberate choice of giving all responsibility to the other. These are instinctive reactions, coded into our DNA. The problem with instincts, however, is that letting them completely loose, you sooner or later end up with a disaster. In this case, excessive domination turns into pathological sadism, that is, enjoying inflicting true suffering onto your partner, while submission can degenerate into masochism in its clinical sense, meaning wallowing in your own pain to the point of seeking it out in self-abusive practices. Differently from what many people still believe, even the institutions recognize that the problem is just with such dangerous forms of uncommon sexuality. All over the world, psychologists and psychiatrists follow rather simple guidelines that can be summarized as any behavior is okay unless it causes distress to the subject or those around them. That is the only instance where you must intervene to restore everyone's well-being. And who can blame them? The real question, in fact, is how is it ever possible that such a widespread instinct isn't causing countless victims every day?
Let me interrupt you just a sec for an important reminder. The episode notes contain all the links to the topics mentioned in the podcast, and if you want to dig deeper, you will find hundreds of further articles on the Ayzad.com website.
The reason why we use 2 different words to indicate sadomasochism and Bdsm is that they are 2 rather different phenomena. The difference isn't really in what you do, since the actions remain more or less the same in both cases, even in intensity, but in how those actions are approached. The sick forms are most of all characterized by always being self-referential. In other words, a pathological sadist doesn't care who their victim is at all. What matters to them are exclusively the actions they perform and the pleasure they provide them, without any care for the other. A pathological masochist doesn't seek a specific dominant partner. They just need someone to hold the whip, mostly because whipping yourself is very difficult, but their identity to them is as indifferent as the brand of any inanimated sex toy. On the other hand, BDSM, which I remind you to be the multiple acronym of bondage, discipline, domination, submission, sadism and masochism, is founded on the empathy between partners, around which a whole culture was built. You just have to visit a topical website or event, or merely chat with someone enthusiastic about these things to be exposed to a series of often repeated concepts. For example, negotiating limits and desires before playing, or managing consent, which in that context is much deeper and much better respected than elsewhere, or to a series of slightly odd acronyms and terms such as SSC, standing for Safe, Sane and Consensual, or Safe Word, meaning an agreed-upon signal to stop whatever you are doing immediately and without recriminations should anyone not feel perfectly at ease anymore. They also have interesting idioms like "your kink is not my kink but it's okay", that actually translates as "you have no right to judge nor discriminate anyone even if they have different tastes than yours". Above all, principles like those have the effect of making interpersonal relationships easier, so much so that lately several psychologists and sexologists began suggesting using them even among those who have absolutely traditional sex. Even more importantly, though, is their collateral effect of increasing empathy between partners. The one thing they share is focusing on everyone's well-being and on the respect for everyone involved. Even if you don't actively study them, immersing yourself in BDSM culture teaches you to realize your fantasies no longer on someone, but with that someone. If you are exposed to that way of conceiving of sexuality, it is inevitable to see the partners as complete persons instead of as objects, and this inevitably diffuses any pathological drift. In a sense, it is as if BDSM is the cure for sadomasochism. In the beginning, we asked ourselves what makes a form of sexuality unusual. It is unsettling to realize that the answer is not in quantities, but in an incredibly more humane approach to whatever we do with the people we love.
The Sexual Explorers Manifesto is a global initiative to spread a healthier and more positive approach to sexuality. You can easily find it with an online search, but in the meantime, let's take a closer look at one of its 15 items. Today's one says:
Everyone has a sex life and the right to live it with satisfaction. Every culture more or less rigidly defines for which persons having a sexual dimension is appropriate and who can instead be derided, criticized, looked with suspicion, or repressed just because they feel the natural call to live their sexuality. Some examples are seniors, disabled persons, those who do not fit common aesthetic canons, adolescents, or even those who are identified by their social role, such as parent, priest, and so on. However, overcoming these conventions and acknowledging this right is essential both for the well-being of the person in question and because this allows to understand the causes for their distress and address them for the benefit of society as a whole.
This is your moment. In every episode, we pick one question among those sent to our expert at podcast@ayzad.com. So let's get writing to get an answer like this.
This is the first episode of Exploring Unusual Sex, and consequently no messages to the podcast came through yet. But in the meantime, I have plenty of questions among those you sent in via my website, social networks, and so on. This is from Martina asking: several girlfriends of mine go nuts for ASMR videos, and one of them in particular claims she even reaches orgasm with them. I don't feel anything though, and I suspect it's all baloney. Who is right? You probably both are. ASMR is the acronym for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, which is a rather newly discovered neurological phenomenon that's not been thoroughly studied yet, therefore, spoiler, I cannot provide you with a definite answer. What is known, though, is it's a stimulation caused by very light and repetitive sensations, such as whispered sentences, cyclical movements, or even just very closely focusing on something. The effect in the brain is to produce alpha waves, which are typical of relaxed states like meditation, hypnosis, or dozing. What you experience on a physical level instead is a tingling in your scalp, descending along the spine and causing a very intense feeling of well-being that, like with a friend, may even reach orgasmic levels. Problem is, the whole mechanism is influenced by so many variables. Some of them are biological. For example, we know that as we get older, the human ear loses the ability of hearing some frequencies, so the effect of an ASMR audio on a 15-year-old person is different from what happens at 25, 30 or 50. Then you have the technical aspects of the devices you experience these videos with. A display refresh frequency of 60 Hz, that's standard, or more. The type of sound card and its sampling capacity, the quality of the speakers or headphones you use, how they are connected, or the audiovisual interferences from the surrounding environment. All of this and more impacts the results of the stimulation. Summing up, you don't have to doubt your friend just as much as I'm sure that ASMR really does nothing for you. Personally, I think that some self-convincing plays a role with many so-called enthusiasts and the desire to feel part of a group of special people, but this is just because I am an awful person. On the other hand, it is also true that each one of us reacts differently to erotic stimulations, so much so that a certain practice of a same-sex toy can make someone go crazy and make another go meh. What I can suggest is to make some experiments trying to watch the same video under different conditions, on different devices, or maybe at different volumes or even at various times of the day, since even tiredness plays a role in the results. Just let me know how it went, will you? After solving this doubt too, I want to remind everyone that sex should always be a pleasure, not a problem, even when it is uncommon. However, if you are experiencing issues, I can help you as a personal coach to discover together the ideal strategy to win back your happiness in this field. You can get in touch through my website Ayzad.com, spelled Ayzad, and saying you are a listener of this podcast will earn you a 20% discount on the first session.
This episode is almost over, but we still have time to read one entry from XXX, the Dictionary of Unusual Sex, available in online bookstores everywhere, but in Italian only for the moment.
Today's entry is altocalciphilia, a technical term to indicate a passion for high heels, an item everyone more or less intensely appreciates for its aesthetics. The reason why this type of footwear is perceived as sexy is genetic. In fact, besides making the legs more slender, it forces the wearer to sway their hips more visibly. Since the pelvis movements are a natural indicator of fertility and of a level of female arousal, our brain instinctively interprets that walk as a sexual command signal, and that does it. A true worship for high heels is the second most common fetishism in the world after that for feet in general, and to think that they had been invented just as a political tool. The first pair of such heels was actually requested in 1533 by Caterina de' Medici for a wedding with the Duke of Orléans, who would otherwise be much taller and overpowering than her. And that really was it. Before leaving you with one last unusual sex fact, I want to thank you for listening and invite you to follow me on my social networks and above all on my website, Ayzad.com, which is also the ideal place to sign up for my newsletter. That way you'll get straight in your inbox new articles, reviews, invitations to events, and the notification for new podcast episodes which you can listen to and comment pretty much everywhere, like iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, and so on. If you liked exploring unusual sex, I would also like to invite you to fill the Tell Me About You form you can find linked in the episode notes, so you will help me make the next episodes even better and closer to your tastes. Finally, you can also lend a hand by telling your friends about this podcast and writing about it on your social networks. Thanks, and before moving on to the next episode, here's the fact I promised you. In 2012, two 20-year-old persons auctioned their virginity online. She got $780,000, he $3,000.